We're going to go through exactly what it would take for the Chicago Bears to trade for Micah Parsons to show you why it's not going to happen.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on the show today, I want to go through all of the different details that would come with a blockbuster Micah Parsons trade for the Chicago Bears that show you that, yes, technically it is possible, but it would be so many hoops to jump through that it would prove detrimental to the team in a lot of other areas that maybe turns out to be a net positive, but you do wonder, is it worth more trouble there? Is it more trouble than it's worth, given all of the subsequent moves you'd have to make in order to make the Micah Parsons deal a success? And so we'll kind of go through the draft pick compensation and the challenges that brings up. We'll go through the salary cap machinations the Bears would have to maneuver in order to make room for Parsons and a contract extension, and why all of this feels just like the latest Jerry Jones folly that we all get sucked into every single time. So I think at a starting point, right, before we get into the idea of the financials, right, we know that Micah Parsons wants a new contract. If you're trading for him, the Bears would have to hand that out, and there's another set of circumstances we'll get to there. Even just the barrier of everything you have to give up in the trade is going to be a real challenge for the Chicago Bears. And it harkens back pretty directly to the Khalil Mack deal. When you're trying to find an asking price for a Micah Parsons trade, that's kind of the closest thing we've had to a player like this entering their prime or in the prime of their career that is an elite pass rusher, someone who might be a future Hall of Fame player, and a player who never becomes available in the NFL. And so when you go back to what the Bears gave up for Khalil Mack back in 2018, I think that's kind of the starting point for Micah Parsons, because you might not know that like where Khalil Mack was in his career compared to where Micah Parsons is in his career. Parsons has actually been more productive of a pass rusher for a lot of his career so far than Mack had been at the time. Not that Mack was any kind of slouch, but just how good Parsons has been. More sacks and quarterback hits and some of the key pass rushing stats. So like Parsons, in theory, could and should and would garner even more than what the Bears gave up for Mack back then. But the starting point for Mack, the Mack trade, you might remember, the Bears gave up a current and a future first-round pick, plus a current sixth-round pick and a future third. So essentially 2 firsts, a third, and a sixth in exchange for Khalil Mack. And then in return with Khalil Mack, you might recall they got an extra second-round pick in 2020 and then an extra fifth-round pick. It was a conditional fifth-round pick. I can't for the life of me remember what the conditions were on that fifth-round pick. But so it wasn't just like 2 firsts, a third, and a sixth for Mack, but you got a second round and a fifth round back that kind of balanced out some of the extras that you gave up. But certainly, if you're trading for Micah Parsons, this is kind of the starting point, right? Maybe you make it less complicated and say the starting point is 2 first-round picks for Micah Parsons, and then you kind of work up from there, because presumably, if the Cowboys were actually entertaining Micah Parsons trade negotiations, which they're not, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but even if Jerry Jones were to answer the phone and engage in these negotiations, certainly the Chicago Bears are not or would not be the only team on the other end of that phone line talking to the Cowboys, right? This is not a one-team negotiation that, no one really wants Micah Parsons, so the Bears can come in and get a deal. No, you're going to be competing with a bidding war of trades with, I'm sure, a number of other teams. I don't want to sit here and try and speculate what other teams would be in on the Micah Parsons trade, but certainly I think a team like Green Bay would make a lot of sense. Detroit might make a lot of sense too. I mean, there's some other teams that even in your division that could be potential Micah Parsons suitors there. So like, you're never going to get a good deal, right? You're not getting a steal on what trade compensation you have to give up for Micah Parsons. As the Bears currently stand right now, They have they have 8 picks for next year because they're expected to get a compensatory pick, but they gave up their future fourth, but got the Rams fourth back in the trade of the draft. But essentially they have a full slate of picks in each of the next 2 years. So you could give up your 2 first-round picks, and then, if you have to give up some extra, whether that's another third or whatever, to make the deal done, you have that. But then you're missing those first-round picks in the team-building process. And I can't help but look back at the Khalil Mack trade and see that certainly Mack was a super valuable addition to the Bears roster, but part of why they couldn't maintain that success after the 12-4 2018 team under Matt Nagy, coach of the year in that big first year, part of the reason why that wasn't sustainable was because of all the draft picks they had to give up in the Khalil Mack trade. Because then all of a sudden you go into that 2019 draft and you don't have a first or a second round pick in that draft. So you're not really picking in that draft until the third round, when they ended up taking, I believe, David Montgomery was their first pick in that draft. And so it's harder to keep the cupboards stocked, keep the roster stocked with cheap young talent, when that 2019 draft class is David Montgomery, Riley Ridley, Duke Shelley, Kenneth White Jr., and Steven Denmark, right? A third, fourth, sixth, and seventh. And obviously Montgomery was a really good player, but nothing else out of that draft class really ever amounted to anything. And it's really hard to sustain success in the NFL if you don't have young, cheap talent on rookie contracts. Hitting on your draft picks is absolutely critical to building the roster. And so they're able to recover a little bit in 2020 when they get Cole Kmet and Jalen Johnson with their 2 second-round picks. And those guys, we've seen how critical they've been to the Bears' success. But no first-round pick in that draft, no third or fourth-round pick in that draft. So you don't really come out of the draft with anything else besides Darnell Mooney as a real contributor, as kind of a lucky 5th-round pick there. But again, you've gone 2 draft classes, and all you've really gotten is David Montgomery, Cole Kmet, Jalen Johnson, Darnell Mooney, like 4 really good players, but like over 2 full draft classes, you need more than that. Because it's not just about drafting starters, right? But you need those guys that are valuable depth pieces. They think about the guys on the roster right now that are just like cheap backups that get the job done. You think about Roshan Johnson. I think about Austin Booker. I think about Terrell Smith. I think about Noah Sewell. I think about Elijah Moore, right? And these are not home run draft picks, but it fills your roster with cheap talent as opposed to veterans that are going to cost a little bit more. And so it certainly wasn't the only reason why the Bears struggled to sustain success after the Khalil Mack trade, but it was part of it, right? It's a contributing factor. And so it's like when the Bears traded for Khalil Mack, it was about going all in on really trying to maximize that 2018 season, that immediate window, knowing that it was going to be hard to keep building up around that. And I think if the Bears did the same thing right now for Micah Parsons, you're going to be in a similar boat where you're essentially saying we're all in on winning right now in 2025, excuse me, I'm losing track of the years, but right now in 2025, because we're adding this player to put us over the top and go for a Super Bowl run. Because then it's going to be harder to keep building the team. You're sacrificing a decent amount of future for the present. And is this year, first year under Ben Johnson, second year of Caleb Williams, like, is this the year to go absolutely all in on trying to get to the Super Bowl? Or is that 2026? Is that 2027? Because if you trade for a player like Khalil Mack, or excuse me, like Micah Parsons, what you're doing is not only limiting your draft pick ability to keep building up your roster, but then also all of your salary cap space is now tied up. You will not have room to continue to add players to your roster to make the team better. In fact, you're going to have to cut players to make the numbers even work. So you're essentially locking yourself in with the rest of the roster as it stands right now, because you're not going to be able to make any other kind of big moves next offseason if you were to trade for Micah Parsons right now. And in addition, you're going to have to lose some players from this roster. So you would add Micah Parsons, but you're going to have to lose some talent and get worse in some other spots. And so it becomes a question of like, is that trade-off worth it? I mean, I think Micah Parsons would be an upgrade and a net positive, but we'll go through what it would take and what the Bears would lose along the way just because of the salary cap issues in addition to the draft pick loss next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. I play fantasy football on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. To celebrate now 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout the month of August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where each week the lowest scoring team gets eliminated until there's only one team left standing. So with the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. The draft picks are just the first hurdle for the Chicago Bears in a Micah Parsons trade. Then you get him in the building and you negotiate and sign him to a long-term contract extension. And okay, maybe in reality, you negotiate that extension before you finalize the trade to make sure you get him in the building. But regardless, like when it comes to talking to the Cowboys, first you got to get it to a deal the Cowboys would get to. Then you got to get to a deal with Parsons that he would get to. And presumably, Micah Parsons is looking at the massive contract that TJ Watt just got as an edge rusher, the massive contract that Myles Garrett got earlier this offseason. Both are making $40+ million a year. And he's going to want something in that range. And he probably deserves something in that range. I don't know that you're going to have too many people saying, wow, he's overpaid as one of the three best pass rushers in football. I'm not here to say like, oh, it wouldn't be worth the Bears giving him $40 million. It's more about where do the Bears find the $40 million under the salary cap space to actually get this done? Because, okay, of course, his contract averages $40 million a year, but you can backload it a little bit, right? So you can bring the numbers down in the first couple years to make him more affordable now, and then make him more expensive in the future when you suspect that the salary cap will continue to rise, and so he'll feel less expensive over time. I get that. But the challenge for Chicago right now is that as we sit today in early August of 2025, the Bears are currently set to be over the cap in 2026. When the new, if the new league year started tomorrow, the Bears would be $9.5 million over the salary cap. Like if they make no other moves, this is before a Micah Parsons trade, right? If they make no other moves between now and March, whenever, the Bears would be $9.5 million over the salary cap space. Between now and then, they will have to find ways to shed salary just to get back to zero, right? That doesn't include any other outside free agents you might want to sign next year. It doesn't include signing your rookies to your next draft class to their rookie contracts. Like the Bears are already over the salary cap for 2026 by $9.5 million. So at a minimum, you have to drop down $9.5 million. If you then trade for Micah Parsons and add somewhere in the neighborhood of $40 million more in salary cap against your cap next year, that puts you close to $50 million over the cap, or maybe you backload the contract and you bring that down so you're, I don't know, $30 million over the cap. Yes, there's a big difference there, but either way, you're a lot of money over the salary cap, and then now you got to start making cuts, right? You've added Micah Parsons, but now you have to subtract elsewhere in order to make Micah Parsons' contract fit in your books. And that's where the pro-con math, not the numbers math, just the talent in versus out math starts to get a little bit more difficult. Because there's a couple moves that maybe are obvious that, okay, you wanted to make those cuts anyway, so not a big deal. But those alone won't be enough. So like when I look at where the Bears could create some salary cap space in next offseason in a hypothetical Micah Parsons trade, you could, kind of the big obvious one is Tremaine Edmonds, right? He's like the third highest paid linebacker in football. Hasn't played up to that. We've got higher expectations for this season, but like maybe you get to the point where it's just like, even if he's pretty good, it's just not worth paying a linebacker. He'll be due $17.5 million next season. And maybe that's one of the trade-offs. You say, okay, well, we got Micah Parsons, so we got to cut Tremaine Edmonds. You can save $15 million there. Maybe that's going to happen either way. And then DeAndre Swift at running back, right? I think there's a certain expectation that is Swift going to make it to the third year of his deal here. If he has a great year, maybe, but Probably not, especially if you got Micah Parsons. Okay, we can live with moving on from DeAndre Swift. That saves you $7.5 million. So those two combined are $22 million in savings. Okay, now we're getting closer to getting Micah Parsons under the salary cap, but we're still over, right? If we start at 9.5, we add another 20 or 30 for Micah Parsons. We got 30 or 40 million to come down. We're at 22.5. You could trade Cole Kmet. There's some expectation that could happen next offseason anyway because of the Colston Loveland draft pick. So you'd save about $8 million on Colston Loveland. Okay, now we're at $30 million in savings by moving on from Edmonds, Swift, and Cole Kmet. That might get you could maybe get somewhere close to zero. Okay, but let's even be generous here and say, boom, you've backloaded Micah Parsons' contract so that if you just get rid of Edmonds, Swift, and Kmet, that equals it out, and you're at $0 in salary cap space. Good, you're no longer over the cap. You've got Micah Parsons. Great. Now what? Now you still have $0 for re-signing your own players, $0 for signing outside free agents, and $0 for signing draft picks. So you're going to have to create some additional salary cap space. So does that mean you make a tough decision? Since you got Micah Parsons, do you trade away Montez Sweat and say, hey, this is our new number one pass rusher? We're already paying Sweat a lot of money. We're paying Dayo Odengbo a lot of money. So if you add Micah Parsons, you don't need to be paying all three a bunch of money. And since Sweat's the more expensive one, and maybe he's underachieving a little bit more, you could trade Montez Sweat, try and find a taker there, and you'd save, I think $16-17 million there. That would give you a little bit of wiggle room there. Okay, but now you've lost Edmonds, Swift, Kmet, and Sweat, and you've gained Micah Parsons. Is that a net positive? I think that's really up for debate. I mean, you could say Swift's not that good. You could say Edmonds is overrated. You could say Kmet is whatever, but you have to replace those guys. Right, I think when we think about moving on from DeAndre Swift, it's not about, they've got a better option on the team, right? It's move on from DeAndre Swift and replace him with, Jeremiah Love, the Notre Dame running back in the draft, right? Or you replace him with, in all these cases, we'll move on from Edmonds, but then you replace him with somebody that you feel like is just as good or better for less money, right? But you don't have any money. Like you got rid of them just to get back to zero. But you don't have the money to then replace them. I mean, you could sign veteran minimum players, but then, so not only do you have to replace Edmonds, Swift, maybe you don't have to replace Kmet because you got Colston Loveland. Okay, I mean, you still need another backup tight end in there, but okay, maybe that. But then you also then don't have any money to give a contract extension to Jaquan Brisker, so you got to let him walk as a free agent. You don't have money to bring back Kevin Byard, and all of a sudden you've got to replace two safeties, a linebacker, a running back, and a tight end, and you don't have any salary cap space to do so. In addition to then all of the other upcoming free agents that you'd have to replace, the backups that are not going to be very expensive, but you still got to replace Andrew Billings. You still have to replace, Chris Williams. You still have to replace Case Keenum, Jonathan Owens, Olamide Zaccheaus, Trey Flowers. I mean, you can go down the roster. You're going to have to replace depth that each one costs $1 or $2 million each, but that's 5 or 6 different players at $1 or $2 million each is another $10 million you need. So it's like, yes, you can literally find ways to clear cap space to get a Micah Parsons contract extension in there, but then you got nothing left and you're sacrificing talent that's already on the roster. So you're getting worse at 4 or 5 other positions to get a huge upgrade at pass rusher. And maybe that's worth it. It's certainly worth it for 2025, right? This season. That's why we talk about the Khalil Mack comparison, right? You would be all in on this year because you still get to keep all these expensive players for year one. You got the space. You could clear the space right now by restructuring some contracts. So you could have Micah Parsons with all these guys for 2025. But then in 2026, you start losing some players. And then as Parsons gets more expensive as you backload his contract, you got to lose a little bit more in 2027, lose a little more in 2028. And all along, you haven't had any of the first round picks to replace that talent. Right? It's one thing if you add Micah Parsons and then you can use your first round pick on a running back to replace DeAndre Swift, and you can use next year's first round pick on a linebacker to replace Tremaine Edmonds. And okay, you can replace expensive veterans with cheaper rookies. But the more draft picks you give up to get Micah Parsons, the fewer cheap players you have to replace all the good players you had to give up to get rid of Micah Parsons. And so it's functionally possible, but practically difficult in a way that makes the Chicago Bears a lot better at pass rusher. But does the upgrade of Micah Parsons make up for the downgrades at a bunch of other positions? Maybe, but it doesn't feel like it's going to be by a lot, right? It's not a clear cut, oh my gosh, the Bears are just so much better because they got worse at all these spots, right? It's like, it's a trade-off that might be worth it, but it's not so clearly, definitively worth it, given everything you'd have to go through to make the Micah Parsons trade happen. And that's where it feels to me like it's not realistic and maybe not necessarily smart. And I kind of want to go through why this isn't going to happen from a Dallas Cowboys perspective, but also just in general, how Ryan Poles has approached building this team next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Do you ever wish that managing your money felt a little easier? Well, with Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. I've got the Monarch Money app on my phone, and I use it almost every single day because it's more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. Because before, I'd have to log into my banking app to see my checking and savings account. I have to log into my credit card app to see how my expenses are there. I have to log into a different app for my retirement account and a different app for my investment accounts. It's 4 different usernames and passwords that you got to count just to try and get a picture of what your finances look like. But with Monarch Money, you can track all of your accounts and investments and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first 12 months. So while the Micah Parsons trade can be done, it will not be done by the Chicago Bears and really by anybody. Right? There's 2 sides of this. There's this doesn't fit how Ryan Poles is approaching the Bears roster right now, and also this doesn't fit how Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys tend to operate. And I think both of those are key factors here. We'll start with the Bears thing. Ryan Poles made his big splash pass rusher move when he traded for Montez Sweat. Right? That was we're going to give up draft picks and we're going to hand out a big contract to a younger, ascending pass rusher entering his prime that we feel like can be a difference maker on our roster. And of course, Montez Sweat is not the caliber of player that Micah Parsons is, and no one's going to put him in that category. And this past season was a little bit of a disappointment from Montez Sweat, like for sure. But it really feels like that was Ryan Poles' big move. And then the follow-up move was signing Dayo Odeyingbo. But now you have 2 of the top 25 most expensive edge rushers in the NFL on your roster. It is just not Ryan Poles' general approach to then add a third super expensive pass rusher to that mix. And okay, maybe I've seen some Bears fans suggest, well, would you trade them Montez Sweat back, in exchange? Like you would give up Sweat and some draft picks for Parsons. And I mean, like, maybe, but we don't see that very often. That's very uncharacteristic of NFL trades. We don't see a lot of player for player trades in general, let alone, blockbuster player for player trade. Like, never say never, but like probably not. And even then, like, part of the appeal of trading for Micah Parsons is that you're adding him with Montez Sweat and with Dayo Odeyingbo. Like, you're trying to boost your pass rush, not lose some of it along the way. So like, I think when Ryan Poles gives out the massive contract to Montez Sweat and then another, $48 million over 4 years or 3 years with Dayo Odeyingbo, like, that was his big pass rush investment. Like, he went out and signed Odeyingbo, signed Grady Jarrett, used 2nd and 3rd round picks at the defensive tackle position, traded a 2nd round pick for Montez Sweat. Like, he's done a lot of investing in the defensive line and in the pass rush. Not all of those investments have panned out the way we would have wanted to, but it's like he's kind of spent his money, his resources there. Just like kind of this offseason on the offensive line, right? Like, for a while he was neglecting it, but now we've got trade for Jonah Jackson, trade for Joe Thuney, sign Drew Dahlman, draft Ozzie Trappell. Like, he's made his big investment. Now, before he made the big defensive line investment, now we got the big offensive line investment. Like, I don't think there's another big investment there, at least, outside of a draft pick. He might still use another high draft pick on a position because those players are cheap. Those are inexpensive players. But like, in terms of the big splash move, it just doesn't feel like he's got another big pass rushing move in him. I think the same was true for Trey Hendrickson. The same was true for TJ Watt, although Watt maybe was never really truly available. And we don't know whether Hendrickson is either, but like this just doesn't feel like where Ryan Poles is right now. Maybe 2026, after this season, we talk about going all in. That's the time you make a Khalil Mack type of move to say, screw the future, because at that point you'll have Caleb Williams in year 3, everyone in Ben Johnson's second year, like everything will be kind of settled in. It just feels like to me next season, like 2026 is the year to really push for the Super Bowl. Like I just don't see the Bears this year, even with Micah Parsons. Are they a Super Bowl contending team? I think Parsons certainly gets them closer than where they are now. But even with Micah Parsons, are the Bears a Micah Parsons away from the Super Bowl in 2025 this season? Or are we all willing to be a little patient with everyone learning a new offense and learning a new defense, right? Like not that they are allowed to have a bad season, but like this is not a Super Bowl push year just yet. Next offseason, different conversation. But for now, I think they're willing to take a little bit more of a slower, steady approach. I mean, I think that's why we haven't seen them do more at the edge rusher up to this point, right? We've talked in this podcast a lot about like go sign Zadarius Smith, go sign Von Miller's gone, but go sign one of these other pass rushers. They still need another pass rusher, but the Bears are like, well, we're not going all in just yet. Like we want to see Dio Dengbo and how he does. We want to see Austin Booker in year 2. They want to see what Jervon Dexter does in year 3. Like they kind of want to see some of these young guys and figure out next offseason if they need to make any other big splash changes and adapt to what's going to happen with Jaquan Brisker and Kevin Byard and maybe DeAndre Swift and maybe Cole Kmet. Like they got enough other fish to fry in the future here. Not everything else is set well enough to say, all right, we're just a Micah Parsons away. And that's where the real challenge is, I think, for Ryan Poles from a team building standpoint. Then you get the Dallas Cowboys stuff, where Jerry Jones loves all of this. Jerry Jones loves that there's Chicago Bears podcasters talking about his team and his player. Jerry Jones' number one currency is attention. Jerry Jones loves press conferences. Jerry Jones loves people talking about him and talking about his team. And the organization is often accused of putting attention and that glamour ahead of even winning football games. Like winning is a little bit secondary there. They have tour groups coming through while players are practicing and working. Like there's a lot of different examples of the Cowboys not always making winning the most important thing. And so Jerry Jones likes that Micah Parsons requested a trade. Jerry Jones likes the attention. He's gone through this with countless players across decades, dating back to Emmitt Smith, but then more recently, CeeDee Lamb and Zeke Elliott, right? And in all of those cases, has Jerry Jones ever caved and traded one of the players? There's certainly players that he ends up not re-signing. He lets Zeke Elliott walk, right? But like trading them ahead of time, especially like before this early, like it's just not how that operates. Jerry Jones is happy to end up paying Micah Parsons extra by going through this drama. Like at the end of the day, it's worth it to him because the money's not that big of an issue. But if he had signed Micah Parsons to an extension in January, no one would have talked about Micah Parsons for the last 9 months. At least other teams, it wouldn't be a national storyline for the last 9 months. You wouldn't have constant speculation about Micah Parsons trade. Like the Cowboys and Jerry Jones love that stuff. And it's financially worth it to him to play the long game with Micah Parsons, knowing that his price tag is going to keep going up. But that's the price he's absolutely willing to pay for everyone to talk about it. And inevitably, he's gonna pay Micah Parsons. Like that's just how this ends. They're not going to trade him. They're not going to let him walk. They're going to pay Micah Parsons. They're going to drag this out for a while. It's going to get messy. They don't mind the mess. They love the mess. But he's not going anywhere. Jerry Jones already said over the weekend, told Dallas Cowboys fans, don't lose sleep over this. We're going to get it taken care of. We always get it taken care of. Relax. And so that's also a big factor here, that even if the Bears were ready to pay everything and give up all the picks and make the moves necessary and go all in on this season, Cowboys aren't going to play ball. Jerry Jones is never going to play ball on this Micah Parsons trade. They're going to get a deal done with Micah Parsons, just like they did with Dak Prescott and et cetera, CeeDee Lamb. This is just how the Cowboys operate. And so hopefully this can just kind of blow over, but Jerry Jones will find a way to keep making it a big story. And so whenever it includes the Chicago Bears, we'll talk about it here on the Locked On Bears podcast and really give it all the details and attention it needs to explain why this just doesn't seem super realistic in a lot of different ways. But given how this has kept coming up with Trey Hendrickson and TJ Watt and stuff throughout the offseason, I thought it was important to kind of dive a little bit deeper into the actual logistics of how this would work if this could actually happen. I hope you learned a little something along the way. We'll get back to more like real Bears training camp storylines on tomorrow's podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen today, you can always check out the Locked On NFL podcast for more football talk, because I co-hosted this morning's Locked On NFL with Tyler Rowland, and we talked about quarterbacks competing for the Super Bowl. Will Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson? Which one has a better shot at winning the Super Bowl this year? Joe Burrow versus Justin Herbert. Aaron Rodgers versus Bo Nix. Always more football talk, and that's what we talked about today on Locked On NFL, so go check that out for your second listen. Just make sure you're coming back to Locked On Bears tomorrow. Make us your first listen once again for another opportunity to bear down.